Hey friend, in this Patreon exclusive video, we're going to be painting clouds. Clouds are so much fun to paint, but they can be a little bit tricky sometimes, and they sometimes might take you for a little bit of a ride that you're not even sure is going to happen, like we do in this tutorial. So at first, I thought I was just going to be using wet and wet technique, but then there's a little bit of a surprise at the end. So let me walk you through the supplies I use for this painting and the step-by-step process. So I've got a couple different ceramic palettes here. We'll make sure to link to all the supplies I'm using in the description of this video, but I know I'm going to be using a lot of blue and a really dark blue. So I'm going to be using Prussian blue, Mars black watercolor, but then also some white acrylic ink, a mop brush to cover the surface a lot with water in the beginning stages for wet and wet, and some round brushes. So I'm squeezing out some Prussian blue in a clean dish in my ceramic palette over here. And then also right next to it in this dish, I'll also be squeezing in some Mars black watercolor. Now, if you've been following my videos for a while, then you know I don't typically use watercolor straight from the tube. I let it dry overnight and then I work with it from the dry and just reactivate it with water. But because I want a really rich, thick consistency with these dark blues in the sky, I'm using it straight from the tube. So I'm gonna wet my paper with water using a mop brush that holds a lot of water is a good idea, or a wash brush, something that's really big and can cover a lot of area quickly. And then I'm going to use wet and wet technique and just stripe in this dark, rich, beautiful Prussian blue that has a touch of Mars black in it, and also just go through different hues and variations of blue with Mars black. So I wouldn't use too much black because Mars black can kind of sit on top of the surface once it dries. So be careful of using too much Mars black mixed with your blue. But I'm just going to leave some gaps of white space here and there for where I know I'm going to be painting around some clouds. So it's not all going to be covered in dark blue, but I love the blending of this blue and the water underneath it. So I'm just kind of striping in and avoiding areas that are more of this lighter blue. We're going to use a paper towel to lift off some of this color, so it won't work very well lifting this dark blue color. So make sure you leave a good chunk of area for clouds with just the lighter blue color that you can lift off with a paper towel. I am using a reference photo that we'll link to in the description of this video. So if you want to follow along with this specific reference photo, you can. Check it out in the description. And I'm just poking in some darker blues here and there. And obviously that lighter stripe in the middle is going to be a great area to add in a cloud. But watercolor has a mind of its own. So you never know what's actually gonna happen. And you gotta go with the flow. And so you'll see in a minute that I have to kind of switch things up halfway through this painting and figure out what to do. So I'm striping in some of this darker color, helping it blend in a little bit more. It's looking a little bit stripy. And then I'm lifting off some of this color for a cloud here in the bottom right quadrant of the paper. And the paper towel itself gives it this beautiful puffy cloud texture. But again, it's going to be difficult to lift off all of the color if you're using a darker blue with the black. So keep that in mind. Much easier to do on lighter colors to get all of it up. So if you want a white cloud, as you can see, it's much easier to lift off this lighter blue than it is all of that dark black blue color. So I'm going quickly because this lifting won't work well if the colors are dry. So at this point, I'm like, I wish that darker blue color would have lifted off a lot easier. So I'm adding some water, clean water on top to see if that helps move the color off and picking it up a little bit more if I can, because we got to improvise sometimes with watercolor. And then I'm coming back up here to finish off these clouds so that it doesn't look like just a light stripe in the top middle of my painting. So we've got some clouds down. And at this point, I am mixing up a dark gray, like a brownish gray color with a little bit of purple. And I'm going to paint in some shadow on the clouds. So lots of water, a little bit of brown, and a little bit of purple gouache. You can use purple watercolor if you want to. I just really like the pastel purple from the squash set, which is perfect for clouds. And then I'm going in and I'm painting shadows on the clouds, starting with the darker hue and then adding water to my brush and just kind of blending it up into a gradient from dark to light. So basically when you're adding in shadows on clouds, you want to think about where your light source is. So from here, it's top right quadrant of the paper. So all the sections of the clouds on the bottom left quadrant of each cloud is going to be in shadow. So think about if you were to have a ball sitting on a table, like a tennis ball or something of that size, ball shape, and you had a lamp shining on it that was above the ball but off to the right side. You would have shadow that's kind of starting on the top-ish left, not corner, but section of the ball, and then curving down and getting more thick and heavy towards the table surface on the bottom left of the ball, and then a little bit up on the right. So you're thinking about the shape that you're painting with the shadow that you're adding. So for these clouds, we have ball shapes all over clouds because we've got like puffy, like think about a little cotton ball or cotton candy, or if you've ever flown in a plane, obviously, and looked out and seen clouds, you got a lot of little ball shapes, just kind of puffy around these clouds. So we're just trying to accentuate those shapes within the clouds. And at this point, I'm like, these clouds aren't looking that cute. There's not enough contrast. I wanted a really bright white cloud with some softer shadows. And so I'm still going with it. But I think at this point, I even said to John, I don't like this. I think I want to start over. And he was like, no, you need to keep at it. People love when you show what you do if you're not liking something and just stick with it and show what happens. And so I chose to stick with it. And I kept blending and trying to figure out if I could save this painting with the way that I was painting it, or if I had to do something different. And so I'm adding in some more purple to see if I needed more color in my shadow to make it work. But it just wasn't working for me. The shadows were just looking kind of flat and dull and boring, and the clouds weren't puffy and white enough. So I'm still just trying to work in these shadows and maybe thinking, okay, maybe I'll just get darker and darker with my shadows to add more detail and more pop, but it's just not working. So stay tuned for how I fix it. So I'm trying to add in some darker shadow grayish color and blend it in a little bit to see if that helps. Now it just kind of looks like gray blobs and I'm not liking it. So what I decide to do now to fix it, I know I want more contrast. So I'm using white acrylic ink. You could also use white gouache. If you don't have white acrylic ink, it just needs to be a medium that's much thicker. And then dabbling in this white to give it more contrast with a big mop brush. Mop brushes have that nice fluffy texture to it, so it's going to give it the perfect little blend and texture for cloud shapes and puffy cloud look. Kind of twisting my brush to get different angles. And already it's looking so much better. I know I'm gonna cover all of these clouds with this white acrylic ink, and then I'm gonna go over it once it's dry with some of that shadow color that I was trying to do already. But even if I didn't add shadow color, like it's already with the color that's underneath the white acrylic ink coming through, it already looks like shadow. So I'm just adding in that acrylic ink, covering this up more so it has more of a pop. We'll link to the white acrylic ink that I'm using in this video, so you can check it out. I love it. It's really it's a nice thickness. It's obviously acrylic ink and it's not acrylic paint, so it's more watery and liquidy. It's the perfect cover up because you can still see through it because of the ink and wateriness, but it's just bright and white enough when you get it in a really thick consistency. So I'm going over these other clouds to add more of that rich white cloud look. I'm not going all over these top ones because we have some shadow that I'm kind of liking once I add in the white. And now I'm mixing white acrylic ink with blue, a light pastel blue gouache, and a little bit of purple for a super light bluish purplish gray color. It's areas where it comes out too dark like this one, I'm just gonna blend it in a little bit with some lighter colors. Lighten it with water. Get rid of the excess on your paper towel so you have like a more dry consistency and it's not too watery. So I'm just going in and where I see some circular shapes and trying to add in that curve. Some blue grays, some purple grays, lighter and darker grays for these clouds. And again, it doesn't look like much at this stage, but once you blend it, the shadows softly merge between the bright white and the gray. So then I'm using my size 6 brush and just kind of blending the gray with the white. Because it's acrylic ink, it stays wet for a good amount of time. So I'm blending the grays with the whites to create a soft gradient between our gray shadow colors and the bright white or highlight colors on the clouds. Because I don't want any obvious crisp edges. I want it to be a soft blend, fluffy look. You can even grab more acrylic ink, more white acrylic ink to blend into the gray. Right now I'm blending the gray into the white because the white is still wet. Just kind of shading like you would a pencil. Now that's looking more realistic, and I wanted to add in just little touches and pops of color, like it was maybe in the late afternoon about to head into sunset. But I don't want it to be too much, so I'm going to blend in these pinks a little bit more with some white. And some darker shadow color here and there that I'm going to blend in some more. So place down the color and then just use your round brush, size 6 round brush, and circular motions to blend it in and bring it up. But you want to make sure to leave a good amount of that bright white left untouched so that it is bright against that darker blue, and then also just shows the dimension and the curve of the cloud. So I need more white so that I can brighten up this cloud here on the left because it was a little bit too transparent, too much of that blue showing through. So I'm just going back on top of this one and layering a bit more white. And then moving on to the grays. So grabbing some of that Mars black, a touch of Prussian blue in it is totally fine too, and then the white acrylic ink. And obviously that shadow, midtones and shadow color is going to be on the bottom left of each one of these clouds. So just kind of dabbing that up and around the base of this cloud. This mop brush is like the perfect texture for painting clouds. Highly recommend getting it. Make sure you check it out. I'll link to it in this video. Now we're moving up to the clouds on the top section of the paper and just adding in some of those shadows, some of those bright whites, and it's all just about mixing and blending, doing the same steps over and over, maybe adding in some purple or some pink, just subtle nods to sunset colors, soft candy, cotton candy sky colors. And then what I'm gonna do is grab a really thick, like buttery consistency of Prussian blue and Mars black. I wanted it to be more contrasty, especially down here at the base. I also wanted to cover where the black was just not mixing very well with the blue. So this bottom section of the paper, I'm going around with that thick mixture of a dark blue. Using my size 6 brush and just kind of dancing around the edges of these clouds to make those clouds really, really pop against this dark, dark blue sky. I didn't do this all in every section of the background where the sky is. I went up about halfway and then stopped, but it would also look nice at the top. I just wouldn't bring it in that section that is still super light. Because that's got a nice blend and it's good to have some contrast and movement in the sky. Unless you wanted to paint clouds in a night sky or something. So because I didn't want to go all over with this dark blue, I decided to merge some of my clouds together so that I wouldn't have to paint it all over. Now coming over here, dancing around the edges of these clouds, giving it little texture and a pop with that light-ish gray against the dark, dark blue is going to make it really pop and feel like clouds. So see how if I would have just kept going with the wet and wet technique and then given up because it wasn't turning out how I didn't want it, we would have a very different experience. And sometimes the painting looks pretty crappy. And then if you kind of think quick on your feet and think, how can I switch this up? Maybe if I add gouache, or maybe if I add this white acrylic ink to make the clouds pop. You have all these expectations in your head of how you think the painting is going to go and what mediums you're going to use, but it's so good to experiment and to just keep rolling with something, even if it's not turning out how you first envisioned it would, because if I would have done that, then I would have probably not turned out with a painting like this, and I really, really like how it turned out. So now I'm just blending or creating a gradient wash between this dark blue and blending it into the lighter blue as we work our way up. So I'm adding more water to my brush and just kind of blending it up. putting in the finishing touches with these dark blue spots, and then we're ready to put the brushes down. So there you have it, a beautiful cloud scene painted with watercolor, white acrylic ink, and a lot of thinking quick on your toes. So moral of the story is to keep at something even if it's not looking how you think it should or how you want it to turn out, because you might surprise yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.